If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Night shifters, people who work at cemeteries, etc. What's your scariest paranormal encounter out there? I used to work in a nursing home. The residents in certain rooms would complain about a man in their room at night, but hallucinations are common in the elderly, so it wasn't really noticed. One night I was mopping the dining room, which had huge windows overlooking the garden. It was around 1 a.m., so it was pitch black outside and low lighting inside. I had this horrible feeling of being watched, so I looked up, and reflected in the window was a man behind me. He had a brown suit on, a bowler hat, and the cruelest look on his face. He grinned, and his mouth was too big. This happened in seconds, and when I turned around, there was obviously no one there, but I'll never forget that look of evil on his face. I paid more attention to the residents after that, and they'd all seen the same man. He just enjoyed terrorizing people. So in the early 1990s, I was a security guard for a gated community. We had a guard shack at the entrance, and we would have to open the gate with a push of a button to let homeowners and construction workers in. I always worked the night shift from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. so one morning on my shift around 2:40 a.m., I had to use the bathroom, which was in the guard shack, and being so silent at this hour, I could hear if any car drove up. So I am sitting on the toilet for a few minutes, then all of a sudden I hear feet slamming on the road, running fast, coming out of the gated community down the hill towards the security shack. So immediately I pulled up my pants and ran outside. I looked all around and no one was there, and mind you, we have flood lights all around the shack. So immediately I went out on patrol. I did a quick drive into the main highway in front of the shack, and there was no one in sight. I also patrolled on the ranch, and there was no one around. I know what I heard, and till this day I cannot think of a logical answer. I used to be a security guard at a hospital. One night, while doing my rounds, I went into the surgery wing and was walking down a hallway when I saw a doctor looking at the whiteboard where all the scheduled surgeries are written down. I said hello doctor and kept going. The doctor didn't say anything back, he just kept studying the whiteboard. When I got back to the security office, I was telling one of the guys that's been there for years about how I greeted this doctor, and he didn't say anything back. I asked if that's the asshole they told me to watch out for. I was asked where I saw him, and I said the surgery ward, and he gave me a smirk. He then explained that the surgery ward closes at 9 p.m. and that all patients are moved into the monitoring wards, there should be no one there. He then asked me if this doctor was studying the schedule board. I said yes, and he then told me that I had just met Dr. Louis City. Apparently, many years ago, one of the surgeons went up to the helipad and jumped off the building. It seems like he never stopped working, though. I used to work on an oncology ward as a nurse. Our side rooms were kept for end-of-life patients on palliative care, and one patient that we had been nursing for a good few weeks died early one morning. The last office had already been done by the night staff, and the patient had moved to the hospital mortuary, so all that remained was to clear the room of personal belongings and tidy up. I sent a student nurse that I was mentoring at the time to do this while I got on with the drug round. The student had known the patient fairly well and was comfortable with this job. About 10 minutes later, a colleague came to me and told me that my student had come flying out of the side room, white as a sheet, and was sobbing in the staff room. I went to find out what the problem was, and the student told me she had been clearing out the sink area in the bathroom and had glanced up and seen the deceased patient reflected in the mirror looking at her over her shoulder. My student was a sensible girl, not given to hysterics, but for the remainder of her placement on that ward, she would not go near that side room. I work overnights in an assisted living facility, ALF, that mostly deals with dementia and Alzheimer's. When someone who's lived there for a while starts actively dying, the rest of the residents get restless. They know death is pacing the halls. Often, the restless residents will, one by one, start talking while in their rooms. I used to go in and check on them, asking what they were saying and who they were talking to. They all respond, the girl in the closet. I have closed closets. I have left small lights on for them. I have gotten one up and taken her to the living room with me, and, still, she stared at the doorless linen closet in the hall and chattered away, not always comprehensible. It only stops after the actively dying patient finally passes. A few residents who have passed started talking to the girl in the closet just days before they sharply declined and started dying. One of the most recent was in October. I'd go in at night to change her diaper, and she'd be propped up on an arm in her bed, chatting away to the girl. She smiled at me one time and pointed at the closet and said, "Oh, haven't you met her? She's such a lovely girl. See, this is my nephew, whom I told you about." I said I'd be back later and didn't go back for almost an hour when she was asleep again. I'm not in the funeral business, but I was a cop in the 1980s. 3 in the morning, walking the streets, checking business doors to make sure they were locked. A few days before, our only mortuary caught fire and burned. It was basically burned to the ground, but it was still standing. The front door was intact. As I was walking past it, I instinctively checked the door and found it unlocked, so I went in. The entire building was charred black. I could see nothing but black, charred wood anywhere. I walked the length of the hall to the sanctuary. What I saw next made me step back a few steps. In the middle of this charred, blackened room, on a small pedestal, was a white, crushed velvet child's coffin. It looked like it would hold a toddler. The entire building was totally destroyed, but here sat this pristine coffin. I turned and left. My mom used to work at an assisted living facility for old people. I visited often to keep them company, and they had a cute cat there to play with. Well, there was this one room at the end of the hall that I never liked going near as a kid. It turns out that room is haunted. Without fail, every old person that was ever put in that room to stay would, at least once in their stay, call the emergency helpline for a nurse to come. When the nurse shows up, my mom in some of these cases, the person asks about the little boy or kid just outside the door. I think they're hurt. Why are you in here? Help that boy. Is that crying child okay? There was a little kid peeking into the room. Whose kid was that? Is your son visiting again? All sorts of SHT like that. I don't think there was much death or anything tied to the room, but that room always got creepy calls about a kid just outside the door. This always happened well past visiting hours, so not even I was there. I hated this story as a kid, but I think my mom didn't want to be scared alone, so she would always tell me when it happened. Unexplained events happened when I worked in Gettysburg at an antique shop. I've been working there for 2 summers, and the owners were closing up shop to move to a different location. The building had rumors of being haunted by the usual Civil War ghosts that draw in tourists. One day I go up to help pack things and move them to the new location when the owner tells me to get something from the basement. I never liked going down there because it was always dark, dank, and had exposed foundation walls. To make matters worse, it was stuffed with old stuff and a wicker crate that was supposedly a viewing coffin for Victorian-era children. Anyway, as I was walking over to the basement stairs, I heard 2 thumps on what I thought was the bottom step. I looked down the stairway, mildly freaked out, and started to grab the handrail to begin my descent. Just then I heard what sounded like someone running, almost charging, up the stairs at me. I got so freaked out that I jumped back and ran to the front of the store, where the owner was, and told him what had happened. He just looked at me with kind of a smirk and said, "Oh yeah, that happens sometimes. They didn't tell you about the basement when you started?" I work as a handyman for a small real estate company. They have apartments and houses we take care of and manage. Our cleaning guy for our office took a vacation, so they had me clean at night. No big deal. Well, one day I had my music playing down the stairs in the washroom next to the restrooms. For some reason, I went upstairs, and I heard my boss's wife call out and say hi and my name. I headed back down the hallway towards the stairs to lower my music. Went down the stairs, and no one was there. I called my boss and asked if they were in the building. They said they were home. Of course. Okay. Kind of freaked out. Thought, what the hell? And decided to check the cameras. 2 ladies were leaving an office late downstairs around the time I heard my name being called. Feeling a little relieved, I watched the cameras again and realized the timing was way off. Like 10 seconds off. When I turned to say hi back and when the workers opened the door to leave their office. I noped out of that right away. It called my name. In my boss's wife's voice. That place was built on an old motel where a lot of prostitution, murder, and lonely death misery took place. I started cleaning way earlier. Later, my boss's sister found an old Ouija board behind our dumpsters. I used to be a supervisor doing scene cleanup work. This was going back about 20 years. Being on 24-hour call, we would get emergency calls at all hours. One night, it was past midnight, and we got a call of a fire at a house. Well, the fire was already put out, but we were called to go remove debris from public view, board up the property, and make sure there was as little as possible that was unsafe. It was reported that the family suffered multiple deaths in the fire, so we had to make sure the scene was secure for investigators. Once we arrived, the house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, a large 2-story house in a nice neighborhood. My partner and I got to work right away. Our first objective was to board up the openings cut by the firefighters. Inside was very dark because, like every fire, the electricity was cut off. We normally carried old 6-volt lanterns, and we also carried a hammer hatchet on our work belts. The inside was still very hot from the fire, and there was debris everywhere. My partner Jay was a big football player type of guy, so I always knew if we ever ran into trouble, we'd have each other's backs. We started boarding up a large sliding door in the back of the house just off the kitchen. We both kept stopping and looking around. We did this without expressing ourselves to each other until we glanced at each other and said, "Did you see that?" What we were seeing were shadows moving behind us, but as soon as we turned around or flashed our mag lights over, nothing was there. We started working at a faster pace while still looking over our shoulders. That is, until we heard a noise from upstairs. Now you have to understand that it's not uncommon for kids or people to be inside unattended burned structures. Sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes to see what they can steal. Assuming that we would either confront kids or some bum trying to steal from this family, we grabbed our lights and hammers and went upstairs. We cleared each room, starting in the room closest to the top of the stairs. He would enter the room and I would stay in the hallway, and we would switch off, eventually coming to the bathroom at the end of the hall. We just thought, okay, we just heard settling noise from the fire. After all, most of the roof and ceiling were gone, just the rafters above. The fire was so devastating that most of the upstairs was almost burnt off from about halfway up the wall to the roof. We make our way back downstairs and start working on another window when once again we hear another noise from upstairs. It doesn't sound like settling but like if someone is dragging something with footsteps. We continued working until we heard noises from upstairs that sounded like a door closing. We both were like, okay, let's go. We went back upstairs and searched room to room, closets, under beds, every inch of space a human could be in nothing. We go back downstairs and continue working, still hearing noises from upstairs and seeing shadows around us. Our last task was to secure the front door. All the openings that needed boarding up downstairs were secure, so we shut the front door and began to secure it when all of a sudden someone started banging on the door from the inside. I turned to Jay, and he is already running to our truck. As I grab our stuff and run after him, by the time I reach the truck, he is already backing it out of the driveway. I jump in, and we are driving about a mile down the road when I yell over to him that the back roll-up door is still open, and he says duck that I am not stopping. I'm a concrete finisher and worker. A few years ago, we were doing a 250 by 150 yard pour for a repair station for truck transports. This is in southern Idaho. It had to be done at night and in the early morning hours due to the business still operating. We had to work around them. Anyway, on this night, it was about 2 a.m., we had just finished pouring, and we were floating the slab and finishing edges. Before we put the power trowel on, the concrete had to set for a little bit, so we took a quick lunch. When we all got back, we noticed something very strange. The tiny footprints of a child made a path right through our slab. They started on the south end forms, ran right up the center, and stopped. We weren't too upset. Stepping in wet concrete does set us back, but only by a few minutes. Anyway, we were a little concerned as raw skin contact with concrete can be harmful, especially to a child, so we investigated. Neither the owner nor any employees were around the area, just us concrete guys. Mind you, this is out in the boonies at 2 a.m. It never made sense to us, and due to our job, we couldn't invest too much thought into it. Most of the crew didn't really put much thought into it. Just the usual sigh and grunt that we had to float the slab again. But yeah, that was weird and stuff. So yeah, my experience at work. Not my story, but my dad's friend. He used to be a sheriff for San Bernardino County back in the late 50s and early 60s, and one night he gets a call that there are some kids in an old abandoned house messing around, turning the lights on, and making a racket. So he and his partner go out to the house, and sure enough, there are lights on in the house. So he and his partner go inside, search the whole house and the perimeter, and find nobody. So they go back inside, turn off the lights, and head back to their car. They get in the car and look up at the house, and a light turns back on upstairs. So they go into the house again and can't find anyone. So they turn off the lights and go back to their car, and then the same light turns on again, and they see a shadow of a person pass by the window. So now they're pissed and run back in the house, guns drawn, yelling that they're the police, and still can't find anyone. So they go back out to the car and radio for dispatch to call the utility company and have them cut power to the house. After a few minutes of waiting, the dispatcher radios them back and says that the utility company cut power to the house a few years ago after the couple who lived there died. At that point, both of the officers got a chill and just hopped back in their cars and left. I was working at a factory, and that night we got out about 04:00. On my way out, I noticed the door to our chemical storage, which needs to be temperature regulated, was wide open. Figuring it was the maintenance department, I stuck my head in to check if they were there and called out. No response, but I did hear movement from the back as if by a person. So I headed back to check in case one of them was back there and injured. The entire way back to the back of the room, I heard someone walking. When I reach the back, there's nobody there, but I hear a familiar voice in my head, not mine, tell me, we need to go now. And then the room just shifts, and it feels like something massive is in there with me. I immediately flood my body with adrenaline, I'm a berserker and can go into a blood rage consciously, and start walking for the door, with the noise of something following behind me. I got out the door, closed it, and everything went back to normal. I could sense whatever it was on the other side of the door, but it seemed like it was stuck in the room. I don't know what was in there, and the next time I went back in, the presence was gone. My dad had a weird experience once when he was in his early 20s. He had an office job in a building in the city. The building had 5 stories, and his office was on the 4th. He had just gotten a promotion when this incident happened, and unfortunately, he had to stay up late a lot of nights to finish up his work. One evening, he was staying late and finally finished his work around 11 p.m. He locked up the office, headed downstairs, said goodbye to the security guard, and left. The next day, he came in and found out the building had been broken into. The police took my dad aside and began questioning him. He told them about staying late and how he definitely locked up and everything. Then my dad asked about the security guard and where he was during all this. The cop gave him a strange look and then went and got my dad's boss, who came over and asked my dad what he was talking about. The cop asked the boss if the building had a security guard, and the boss shook his head and said that they used to, but the security guard had died a week ago and they hadn't hired another one yet. My dad was understandably shocked by this. He had definitely spoken to the very real guard who had worked there for years. He didn't even know the guard had died. Nobody had informed him yet. Also, the person who had broken in ended up being a disgruntled former employee who had been fired a couple of months prior. He told the police that he chose that particular time to break in because he knew the security guard had just passed away, so it would be easy to just break in without worrying about being apprehended. Again, my dad said the guard was very real looking. Not hazy in any way. The guard looked how he always looked and seemed genuinely content. This story still gives me chills to think about. I worked the night shift at a facility built in the late 1890s that was originally a TB sanitarium. There were 4 floors built into the side of a mountain, so the layout was quite odd, with entrances on the 1st and 4th floors. The 2nd floor was a locked Alzheimer's unit, and the only way on or off was via elevator with an employee pass code. This was the unit I was first assigned to without any knowledge of the history of this building. One night, all the residents were in bed, and the lights were dim in the hallway. Being dementia patients, some of them wandered about, not staying in bed. One patient in particular kept roaming the halls and had to be put back to bed 3 times. I was standing at the nurse's station doing paperwork to simplify the process of continually redirecting her. While writing, I saw her out of the corner of my eye, ambling up to the nurse's desk again. I finished my sentence and turned to put her back to bed. She wasn't there. I went to her room, and she was sleeping soundly. No other patients were up at this time. I was perplexed but attributed it to sleep deprivation, as I was new to the night shift. I found out the history of the building later and that the unit I was working in had housed Native American children back when it was the TB hospital. Old photographs found in the attic during renovations confirmed this. I am a new night shift CNA at my local children's hospital. Shortly before I began, a CNA was at her station on the computer. She was alone at this time since the other CNA was out doing rounds and wouldn't be back for at least 15 minutes. As she's working away, something catches the corner of her eye. Enough for her to look in that direction, which was looking into an empty room. The room itself was lightly lit so as to make it easier for a new patient to come in at any time, but no one was assigned to that room. Before she turns back to the computer, she sees a young boy with blonde hair and dressed in a gown walk from behind the slightly drawn curtain to the bathroom. From what I heard, she instantly freaked out and went to find nurses. All of which confirmed the room was empty, but she insisted she saw someone walk into the bathroom. They check, and it's empty. She is so distraught that I actually told her to go home and take it easy. It is also common knowledge that a woman is often seen walking through a specific hallway, even during the day. There is also a story of when a security guard and several staff members heard a phantom infant crying in an empty room. They checked the cameras, and sure enough, the room was empty. When they opened the door, the crying would stop but then resume shortly after closing the door again. I have worked several night shifts now and have yet to encounter anything myself. The creepiest so far has been the child laughing while asleep in a dark room. It's not expected and incredibly uncomfortable initially, but then it's a little cute. Another time, a grandmother was staying over and was straight up talking in her sleep. It sounded like she was having a conversation with someone while facing the wall. Again, creepy when you don't expect it. Especially in a dark room. I'm a carer and have been for about 5 to 6 years, and I prefer to work nights as it's a calmer working experience. I've seen and heard many strange things, but 2 that stick out I've decided to talk about. One, I was on shift one night, and every hour we have to do checks on the residents to make sure they are okay and are still with us. So I'm doing my checks, and everything is going okay until I get to the last room. This lady likes her door closed at night so the light in the corridor doesn't wake her up, and I go to open her door and I can't move it. It's as if someone is pushing it shut from the other side. I try 2 or 3 times to open it, but it won't budge, and fearing the lady has fallen behind it, I go get the nurse on shift and my colleagues. Each of us tried to open the door, but it wouldn't move. After 20 minutes, the door opens easily as it should, and the lady is asleep in bed, snoring away, and there is nothing there to keep it closed. I should mention this was in a part of the building where no one likes to be alone as it feels like you are being watched, and on a couple of occasions a shadow has been seen in some of the rooms. 2, I came in for my shift and found out one of the residents had passed away 30 minutes before us night staff got there. We were waiting for the undertakers to come collect the body, and it could be up to 2 hours before they got there. As we were going about our jobs, the buzzer in that room went off. I went and switched it off and left the room. His buzzer went off every 10 minutes until the undertakers arrived. None of us could explain why it was doing that. I'm a CS in the USN working at a galley in the States, and I've been working an overnight shift, generally 1700 to 0500, for the last couple months. It's supposed to be a fire watch because the fire alarm in the galley is busted and they need people to stay overnight in case it randomly goes off in the middle of the night or whatever. When they first threw the idea around, I was the primary candidate since I'm the only SN who lives on base. Anyway, when they were presenting the idea to me, someone mentioned that the galley was supposedly haunted, and I don't think they were just saying that to scare me, because I remember someone saying that a while back, around the time when I first arrived at the base. I'm not really afraid of the dark or being alone, so I don't really mind it, and I'm not a strong believer in ghosts, but around the first couple weeks I'd been working this shift, I heard and saw a few things that made me doubt myself. In one instance, I had caught up on a good amount of the work they had asked me to do overnight, so I went to use the bathroom and kind of just sat there listening to their bullshitting on my phone, and I heard the bathroom door open. It's a decently heavy door and makes a pretty distinct sound when someone pushes it open, and it really scared the hell out of me. Another time, when I was walking to the bathroom, I passed the room where we clean dishes used by the customers, plates, trays, etc., and it literally sounded like someone slamming 2 metal pans together repeatedly. Other than that, it's just a lot of seeing SHT move out of the corner of my eye or hearing weird noises I can't explain. It's been pretty calm for the last month, though. Thoughts? I work the night shift at a 1920s mental hospital. There are 4 floors, with the 4th floor being the well-known hotspot for paranormal activity. Being a security guard, I have to check it out every once in a while. The 4th floor is essentially an extremely long hallway, approx. 1,800 steps, with housing units on both sides throughout. Each unit has a 5-inch thick steel door, and there's a window at the very end of the hall. They don't house patients due to the fact that the county took over a while before I started, and it's completely empty by the time the 3rd shift rolls around. The 4th floor is also the only floor in the entire complex that is completely off the ground due to the complex being built into a hill. It is also where electroshock therapy took place a long time ago. This occurrence happened last Wednesday on the 3rd shift. I wanted to do a walk through the 4th floor that night around 3 a.m. for no other reason than I was feeling brave. I walk all the way down the 4th floor to the window. Eventually, as I got closer, I started seeing that the window obviously needed cleaning. When I got about 5 feet away, all of a sudden there was a handprint that would have been extremely noticeable from even 15 feet away. Looked at the handprint, turned around, said nope and walked back down the hall. On my way back from the window, I peeked into a side office area with my flashlight just to look. Nothing kept going. After a couple seconds, it sounded like someone was running up behind me, so I walked even faster because everything in my body said not to turn around. As I kept walking, I passed by a unit, and as I passed, I heard what sounded like someone punching the door. I put it up to paranoia due to the running I heard prior, that is, until I passed another unit. Another loud thud, as if someone punched the door. So at this point, I start speed walking down the hall, and while I'm doing so, I hear footsteps following mine. Mind you, these units are not connected at all, and the entire floor is entirely empty. That's just one of my experiences. I have also been having dreams of a white, skinny woman in a hospital gown who has black hair with bangs in her face. I always thought she was just a recurring person in my dreams until I talked with one of the CNAs that worked tonight in the kids unit. I never brought her up to the CNA, we were just talking about ghosts, and she said that numerous people have said that they've seen the exact woman I just explained. I explained to the CNA in detail how she looked in my dreams, and she just went pale with her mouth hanging open. Supposedly, this ghost is extremely well known throughout the hospital by various people. People have seen her in mirrors, locked in bathrooms, and just walking around. But in my dreams, she always just appears or runs up to me, grabs me, and screams in my face. There was this one dream in particular where I woke up from a dream to wake up in my duplex's stairway. I walk down the stairs, because that's where my bedroom is, and walk into my bedroom. Once in my bedroom, I see my bed, my fiancée sleeping on her side of the bed, and myself sleeping. In front of my closet, which is on my side of the bed, I see that same woman standing next to my body, just staring at me. I walk up to her, and I get the courage to ask her just who the hell she is. She looks at me, grabs me, screams in my face, then shoves me onto my bed, which is when I officially woke up at 3:15 a.m. I have no clue who this woman is at all, but I still dream about her every now and then. Every single dream is in a different place, but she's just there, and this has been going on since I started working at my job. Night shift in the nursing home. I was making rounds in the dark hall of the nursing home. Mostly to help out with incontinence and bathroom breaks. There's only one assistant per hall. I went into the room with two ladies. One was sound asleep, the other awake. She had some mild dementia. The curtains are attached to the ceiling for privacy, much like in a hospital. I went into her side of the curtains, leaving a small gap open, and told her that I was there to help her. She said, "Okay, but can you please close the curtains all the way? I don't want him to see us," and I immediately got goosebumps and asked, "WH?" and she said the man was right there with the hat, and I followed her pointed finger to the small gap in the curtain that I had left open. I could see that there was a mirror, and in the reflection of that mirror, an empty chair was facing us. I immediately closed the curtain and was slightly nervous for the rest of my shift. My first job ever was working at a gas station when I was 15. It was an old building off the beaten path in the Midwest. It had leaking ceilings, dirt caked on everything, dust everywhere, mold everywhere, etc. I worked with a bunch of people who were clearly meth heads, rotten teeth, twitchy, stealing stuff, and even someone who was convicted for manslaughter. That story is for a different time. Well, one part of the job is that at the end of the night, you have to take the trash to the dumpster. You know the scene from SpongeBob when he has to take out the trash on the graveyard shift? Yeah, that was my exact experience. The dumpster was about 50 yards from the back door of the gas station, illuminated only by a single light hanging over it, and next to the semi-trucks that used to stay overnight there. It was dark. One night I'm taking out the trash, and as I throw the bag in, I hear someone quietly say, "Hey, boy." I turn around and don't see anything but a few semi-trucks with their lights off. I start to think it's my imagination, so I turn to head back to the store, and I hear the voice again, but louder, say, "PSST, hey, boy." Thinking it was someone who needed something, I said, "Hello? Can I help you? Come here." The voice hissed. I still can't see anyone because it's so dark, and my gut is screaming hell no, so I don't say anything and just start walking back to the building. At this point, my hair is standing up on the back of my neck, and I start to jog back to the gas station when I hear a man's deep voice shout at the top of his lungs, "Hey, boy." I sprint back to the gas station, lock the doors because we were closing up for the night, beeline it to my car in the parking lot, and get TF out of there. The next morning I show up for my shift, and there's police tape, several cop cars, and a couple of officers talking to my manager. It turns out someone broke in and robbed the place about 30 minutes after I left. When I told the police my story, they mentioned how it seemed to fit a couple of other gas station robberies in the area, and they usually take hostages and rob the store at gunpoint. One person was nearly beaten to death. To this day, I still think about this. I can't imagine what would have happened if I hadn't listened to my gut. I lived at the cemetery I worked at. I had several weird occurrences. It was a house with an office attached. Next to the kitchen was an office that led to another sitting room. I was in the kitchen cooking when my dog got up suddenly and barked at the office doorway. Then, as he's barking, he slowly and fearfully makes his way through that office towards the sitting room doorway. I'm like, "What the heck, doggo?" So I go into the office, and he is at the doorway barking full steam but will not enter the sitting room. I go into the sitting room to check it out, and I see nothing. I try to call him in, and he just continues to bark, the hair on his back raised, and will not cross the threshold into that room. I ended up closing the door to both rooms, and he finally calmed down, but he kept looking over there and growling under his breath towards the door. Weird. I used to work at a cemetery in San Diego. People would run into where I worked, freaking out every time they saw something. These people would be clients, park visitors, and even workers. They were all different types of people, but they all had the same exact story. The same ghost or person, the same feeling of it approaching you and staring at you in the face, the same feeling when it touches you, icy and cold, wrapping around you, making it hard to breathe, and the ice-cold feeling of it going right through your body. What's crazy is that all these people and all these stories all came from the same exact hallway in the same building. All in one exact spot. It just blows my mind that there are all these people making all these little shows and videos about catching ghosts, and we hardly see anything. But in this one exact spot in San Diego, there is for sure a very scary haunted place. I used to work at a 1-hour photo lab that also put photos on plates. The way our building was laid out, it was all in a long row, so you had to walk through one room to get to the other. I set the alarm, in the back, and walked through all the rooms to exit the front door, as I was the last to leave. The next morning when I came in, every faucet in the building was running full blast. I definitely would have noticed as I had walked by all four as I was leaving the night before. As I got to the main faucet, there was one of the plates that had been on display in the front of the building under the running water with a knife through the plate. It sent chills down my spine. This was a ceramic plate, and there is no way you could put a knife through the center of the plate without it shattering. It was so hard to work there alone after that. I do not work around death, burial, or any night shift. Until I was in my 30s, every place we lived had some sort of SHT going on that usually only I perceived. Only a couple of times did someone else witness it with me, and it was a relief because, at some point, I really thought I might be going insane because I couldn't rationalize it. One thing that happened to a group, though, as a kid, my mom would send us off to camp. I was probably about 10 one year when we went to a camp in the woods where all the dogs wore the same collar. They did this so the dogs wouldn't get confused with neighboring dogs, I guess. Many of us saw a husky on a regular basis. It was often lying on a plain dirt patch near the main camp. One night, I had to go to the bathroom. We were required to go to the bathroom in groups of 3 or more at night because they were in a separate building. We walk out there in a group of 5. On the way back, we heard some noise and saw the husky coming from the woods. He was acting agitated and backing slowly towards us, as if putting his body between us and something. This huge bear just comes out of the freaking woods, mad as all ducking hell, and at us on its hind legs. We ran, screaming, back to camp and could hear the husky barking and growling. We immediately woke the 2 counselors in our building and told them one of the dogs was protecting us from a bear and was going to get killed. The counselors told us to stay put, and we ran off into the night. But they returned quite shortly after and said there was nothing there. Nothing. We were urged to go back to bed. The counselors seemed annoyed as hell, but we were more afraid that the dog would be severely injured or die, saving us. The next morning, the counselors made us go to exactly where it happened. Despite there being no signs of anything, from a paw print to a broken branch, we stood by our story. So they made us talk to a more senior counselor or whatever. The first thing we said was that the husky tried to save us. The guy kind of scoffed and said that they didn't have a husky as one of the camp dogs. We all protested and said that it absolutely was and that it had a camp collar, and we'd see it lying on that spot many times. All the color left his face. He told us that the camp used to have a husky, but it died fighting off a bear that tried to attack 2 campers. The bear was badly wounded by the dog but was killed by someone who worked for the park. And the spot the dog was always on was literally its grave. Sure enough, as we watched, he dusted off the top layer of dirt to reveal a plain little memorial plaque to the dog who saved 2 campers' lives. In this case, not only had most campers seen the dog, but I also had 4 eyewitnesses who saw the same thing. A few years ago, I was working a night shift on a geriatric rehabilitation ward in an old hospital that's since closed down. The ward is a long L-shaped corridor, with the nurses' station situated at the bend. I was doing some paperwork at the nurses' station, and the other nurse on duty was on her break, sitting in the lounge down the end of the corridor. Out of nowhere, I heard this almighty crash from one of the bedrooms, and I shot straight up and started running towards it. My colleague was coming down the corridor towards me, as we had both assumed that the gentleman in one of the single-bedded rooms had fallen out of bed. The man in this room was still fast asleep in the bed, and his sensor mat that tells us if he's up had not activated. In the middle of the room lay his bedside cabinet, face down on the ground. Further across from that, the drawer from it was on the floor against the wall across from where the cabinet usually faces. We didn't really know what to make of it, so I picked up the cabinet and put the drawer back in it. We woke the man up to ask if he had thrown it, but he was as confused as us. Realistically, he couldn't have anyway, as it was quite heavy and he was pretty frail, needing help to even mobilize. It's not possible that another patient had been in the room, as we did a round immediately after and everyone was in bed. No one had been in the corridor prior to this happening. For the next few weeks, I felt really uncomfortable being in that room, even during my daytime duties, and was so glad when the hospital was closed down, as it meant I got to move to a brand new one. I have a friend who used to work the night shift at an old people's home. He had a lot of stories like this. He sat at the front desk on the first floor, mostly just playing MMOs to kill time, but he would have to do rounds every couple of hours. The first floor of this particular place had no resident rooms on it. All the residents lived upstairs. It was a pretty big place, maybe 6 or 7 stories. The first floor was where all the rooms for the functions of the building were, like the kitchen, laundry, common activity rooms, and that kind of stuff. The residents were actually locked into their floors after dark for security and safety, so there should never have been anyone moving around besides my friend. He would hear the elevator ding all the time, and since the residents weren't supposed to move around, he would have to check it out. Luckily, he had a security system, so he could just check the camera's live feed, and there was never anyone on the elevator. Well, almost never. On time, when he was walking the halls doing his rounds, he heard the elevator ding behind him down the hall. He spun around to look, and he says all he saw was a shadow quickly move out of the elevator and down the hall. He shined his light and, of course, nothing, and he walked down the hall to make sure it wasn't a person and also nothing. He also told me he would hear music occasionally, but not from a radio, just ambient but always far away, or that he would hear people talking in the distance. He would also get alerts from the security system all the time for movement triggers, like when the camera on the feed automatically goes full screen when the motion tracker kicks in. There was never anything on the feed, and he told me it only works on bigger objects, so a mouse or something wouldn't trigger it. One time he told me how all the motion trackers were going off, leading right to his front desk area. As he saw them activating closer and closer to him, he decided it was a good time to go outside for a smoke. He just didn't want to deal with it. About 20 years ago, I worked the third shift in a mental hospital. There were 2 floors. One night, I needed to go upstairs for something. I was standing in front of the elevator, with my back to a long hall that stretched over half the length of the building. I suddenly felt as though something was rushing towards me up the hallway at top speed. There was no noise, and I felt like I should not turn around. The elevator door opened, and I got in and felt for the up button. Whatever it was, it didn't make it into the elevator. When the elevator got to the second floor, I was still so terrified that I couldn't turn around or move, and I felt myself tearing up and starting to hyperventilate. The elevator opened right across from the nurse's station, and someone said, "What's wrong? What happened?" And I really started to cry. I felt someone enter the elevator and gently guide me out to a chair in the nurse's station. 2 of my favorites, Janice and Anne, were there. I tried to brush it off at first, and Janice said, kind of sharply, "I just talked to you downstairs, and you were fine. Did you see something down there?" Not, "Did someone break in or get in?" but "Did I see something?" I told them I hadn't seen anything, but I sure as shit felt something, and I explained what happened. I have goosebumps so bad right now, and I'm almost tearing up, to them both. I saw them exchange a glance, and Janice called over to the other unit for their psych tech, Phil, to come over. As an aside, this hospital was chronically understaffed at night, and we had to help each other out a lot, so it was a pretty tight shift, which is why I was willing to open up to the 3 of them. Phil seemed angered by my story and said, "It's not right. It's not safe for people to be alone down there all night." I was left with the impression that he either didn't believe me or thought someone had gotten in through our unbelievably shaky security. I don't remember what else happened then, but at some point I went back downstairs, and I think Phil hung out with me for the rest of the night. I don't remember us dwelling on it because I sure as shit couldn't afford to quit. I was to find out later that Phil and Janice had both seen an apparition clearly enough to believe someone had gotten into the locked adolescent unit, and many people had had negative experiences there. The hospital ended up closing eventually and getting broken up into a same-day surgery center and some doctors' offices. No way in hell would I go back there. I used to work at a small utility in Texas back in the day. The building I worked in was very small and only had 5 people in it during the day, 1 at night and on weekends. The building was located in a rough area with lots of transmission lines, commercial buildings, and retired generators. Crackheads and hookers were a very common sight. I always heard noises at night. I'm not the type to jump to conclusions that noises were ghosts. I'd always assume it was an animal or a crackhead. However, I always felt like I was being watched while in the building. an uneasy feeling that caused me to turn around regularly to make sure no one was behind me. One night I was walking down the hallway from the men's room back to the control room. I was walking by an office prior to my turn into the control room when I saw someone sitting at the desk in the office across the hall. I stopped, turned, and went into the office, and no one was there. This started to happen regularly. My coworker was once walking down that same hall when he knew no one was in the office during the day. He said he saw someone turn into the control room, and thinking it was our boss, he followed to talk to him. There was no one there. I worked in the hospital, had been in service for nearly 70 years, and there had been reported paranormal activity since the building first opened. However, on the darker side, there have been cases of people seeing shadow figures and even ghost patients, especially children. Probably the worst I've heard is staff seeing a demon in dark hallways and crawling on the ceiling. I would say at least 10,000 people have passed away here, so at night it can get extremely unsettling knowing that most activity is reported at night. On to the point. I was working overtime and into the night. It was around 4 a.m., if I remember correctly. My coworker at the time was in a different sector at the time when, all of a sudden, I heard an ear-piercing shriek. So I immediately ran to the sector he was in and saw him on the floor, looking terrified. I asked him what the hell happened, and he said he saw a patient walk from room 57 to room 58. I told him that it was probably just a patient who got up to use the bathroom. He said that there was only one patient in the sector, and he had to use a urinal bottle for bathroom activities. I asked him if there were any other staff with him, and he said, "Yes, Jared is with me, but he's behind me." I said, "Then who was it then?" All he did was shrug. We passed it off as a hallucination and continued our shift. After a while, me and him are cleaning in the same hallway and hear thuds down the hall. "Relax, it's just another staff member." Which it fortunately was. After that, we begin to hear much fainter thuds from below us. There were other staff on the bottom floor, so we passed it off as that. We learned when we heard the thuds that they had just left for a staff change days later. Anyway, I'm walking to room 75, and I see something zoom past me in the corner of my eye. I asked my coworker, "What was that?" "What was what?" My coworker said, "The little shadow that just went past us." I said, "Stop saying random shit trying to scare me, it's not funny," my coworker said. As soon as I said that, we heard a door slam shut. At this point, we are getting freaked out, and I called out to Jared, to which he didn't respond. We learned later that Jared had gone to the bottom floor, then another door slammed shut. Then, me and my coworker see something we cannot describe. It looked like a blob of darkness coming straight at us. It sped and made a ghastly moan. We started running for our lives. We stopped at the end of the sector and glanced back. Nothing. No evidence existed that we had just been attacked. Me and my coworker glanced down the hall into the darkness and see nothing but inky black. Whatever had followed us went away.